This is CyberSound, your simplified and fundamentals-focused source for all things cybersecurity, with your hosts, Jason Pufall and Stephen Maresca.
Welcome to CyberSound. I'm your host, Jason Pufall. Today, joined by Matt Fissaro, Steve Maresca, and Lou Ardolino. Welcome, everybody.
Hey. Howdy.
So, Lou, this is your second time joining the podcast. We're going to bring you in for a serious discussion today.
Okay.
So I think actually we'll separate this into two people the tiniest bit, because I think Matt, you've been on the in part of the TB&G Inc. family for a really long time with a really long background in infrastructure for sure.
Yep.
I think really at a high level, I guess Steve and I have been involved in security sort of together. So we'll take the security position in this, and I think Lou. Really probably also on that infrastructure side. So maybe we make this a 2 versus 2 discussion.
A little battle of the bands.
Yeah. I mean, well, that way it's fair. And what we want to cover a little bit is I think that sort of age-old struggle between, say infrastructure and, sort of keeping things running and maybe implementing new technologies versus maybe that approach that security brings sometimes, which is, inspection and, maybe to some degree, prevention of activities.
You mean just saying no?
Just saying no. Because everybody knows a good security person just says no to everything, right? Like that's effective security controls. But it is a serious topic, right? And it is one that we run across pretty regularly, which is simply we're probably working with a company that has a lot more infrastructure folks, maybe not a complete security mindset, but maybe business ownership or regulatory requirements, whatever, require some implementation of security. And so, how do you get both sides to work together effectively? Because I think that is honestly a challenge, right? And I think traditionally has always been difficult to do. So, I think I'm gonna just toss it over to the fence. I'll call it to the bad guys, to the infrastructure guys. Where is that challenge? I'm sure you've been faced with this a lot of times, rolling out projects. Yep. Where do you think that friction starts?
Yeah. And Lou, I think you probably have one of the hardest jobs here, right? Because you're kind of in charge of our client success. So when people have problems, they kind of go right to Lou Ardolino, right?
Yeah, that's correct. And when you talk about the challenges of keeping your customers secure, a lot of times, when you're in an engagement and you're contractually obligated to support an environment, you're kind of in a reactive phase as far as, support services, right? So, of course you're performing all your patching and your maintenance as well as you can. But unless you have change control implemented from a support standpoint, you could really hold yourself liable to making some serious mistakes, not documenting what you've done, not getting approval for what you've done. And that's just from like the day-to-day support perspective. The customer wants it done as fast as possible. SLAs be damned. Priority matrices be damned, just get it done. And your engineering team wants to deliver as quickly and as efficiently that they think as possible. And that's where you kind of get stuck. When it comes from a project perspective, when you're implementing a widget or, you're doing a network forklift, you stick to the scope of work as best you can. But I think, if we took a scope of work from the professional services side, let's say the infrastructure side, and we ran it, we handed it to Steve Maresca and said, hey, here's our scope of work for this server, firewall, switch deployment. We need to get this done in 3 weeks. What do you think? It would take us about 6 months to get it done by the time we finish redlining everything in that SOW. And that's where the problem lies, because He's not wrong, right? He's not wrong. And neither is the project implementation team. They they want to get it done as professionally and as efficiently as possible. But unless you're really interjecting a security flavor into your scopes of work and into your day-to-day help desk support of your customers, you can really tie things up from a delivery perspective, and you could also get yourself tied up from a liability perspective as a company.
I think part of that is simply a reflection of the customer priority, right? You have their revenue is directly tied, their business success is directly tied to how rapidly something gets rolled out. So, from an infrastructure deployment, whether that's a internal infrastructure team rolling out a new app or an MSP doing that on the behalf, it's not necessarily keeping in mind the choke points or monitoring or secondary things needed to deliver security. It's not an afterthought per se. It's just responsive to the need to get something out the door to meet a, quarterly deadline or something like that for revenue, right? I think that's the underlying cause.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, look at it from even the most basic level of security from a year ago. Like, we were trying to sell multi-factor authentication to customers, and they would just roll their eyes because they didn't want their employees to have to take that extra step to put in a code. Right. Now, their cyber liability insurance policy demands it, and we're doing it for them now with no questions asked. But that cycle takes a while for because immediately they go to the lowest common denominator, and they think about what's going to cause them the most pain, not what's going to prevent them from a security incident.
So, I mean, how much of it really is a client, right? In a way, infrastructure is sort of the here and now, right? It is, you're implementing a new tool, a new program, whatever the case might be, and maybe end users are clamoring for it. Security tends to be a little bit more sort of future focused, in the sense that you're reducing risk for some indeterminate future state, right? So it's a lot harder to sell, and it's also, frankly, a lot less attractive. And in many ways, IT, right? Your more traditional IT people, they're judged on stability and what have you delivered for me lately. And security doesn't really bring that.
Yeah, security is more anticipatory of potential risk, which is restating what you said, but it's in essence the main issue here.
Right. And it's hard to look ahead, right? I mean, that's what in a way, it's insurance, right? And a lot of people defer insurance because, like, well, I could take my $200 a month and spend that on something a lot more fun. So, and that's kind of the business we're in some ways.
Yeah, and a lot of times, back when I was doing infrastructure, I always have these internal arguments with my peers too, right? I would always be a lot more security focused, and they would be more, we need to get this done, right? And I always saw both sides, and quite honestly, I pared back sometimes, what I was expecting out of a secure deployment or something. It's always a struggle, because when you're doing infrastructure, you have to get it done quick, right? You can't wait for a security review to be done, or you feel like you can't wait.
Right, you feel like you can't wait.
You always feel like you're kind of just sitting there on your hands if you're not doing something all the time. A lot of times that's what's expected from them, or if you're a service provider, you're expected to be doing work all the time. And when you're told, hey, stop, I need the security team to do something, you feel impeded.
Right. Mm-hmm. Speaking from like the customer's perspective, they've greenlit the product or the widget or the service. They've gone through procurement. They've done through the contracting already. They've not thought of the vendor risk oriented, the data risk, and they have already passed to the point of saying, here's our financial outlay. They don't want to go backwards, and it feels like they're going backwards if any security is injected late in the process.
Right,
late in the process. So I think, right, what I wanted to make sure that we covered was, how do you rectify this issue? And I think, Steve, you jokingly said at the beginning, right? Security is taking the position of no, and I think there's two solutions to this. One clearly is, and obviously we don't believe that security is taking the position of no. But an effective security practitioner understands balance, to your point, Matt, right? Which is coming into it and recognizing there's business needs to get a certain product out, and you want to make that product as secure as you can. And frankly, maybe the time constraints that you have, or sort of that meet the business needs, and it's unlikely that you'll be able to go and implement every security control that you want, or be in the position where you lock it down fully, right? Because it just won't work right. And then I think the other is the infrastructure folks do need to bring in security earlier in the process. And I think if you've got a team that does show balance, a security team that shows balance, there's going to be an increased willingness to do that.
Especially because risk can be accordingly balanced with effort, because it might be something that can be deferred rather than baked into an infrastructure rollout. It's just a matter of knowing, hey, here are some potential risks. We've documented them. We'll return to them next quarter. That's sufficient in many cases. But that type of thought practice, that thought behind it, is not often practiced.
Right.
Yeah. I agree with you there. Some of our best infrastructure projects have come from customers that have had vulnerability assessments, and they realize the risk that they have, and they're willing to, take those extra steps to make sure that the deployment is secure as well.
Yeah, a lot of it just comes down to communication, right? Always.
That is for sure.
Right. Yeah, I mean, communicating that, timelines might change because some security process has to be done for it to work properly. Or infrastructure just communicating, hey, here's when I have to have this done by.
Right.
Right. If everyone's talking to each other and feel that they can put forward their procedures that have to happen, then it's usually successful. It's when you feel like you have to hold back, where you're stepping on eggshells to do anything. That's when it becomes a really tenuous situation.
Yeah, you establish the customer expectations from the beginning, and you keep touching base with those at touch points throughout the project implementation. So the key is to like you said, communication right from the get go.
Yep, I'm fond of talking about the fact that it's very possible to deploy something that has a security flaw if it's business critical. It's just that you have to have that conversation to ensure everybody's aware of it. And as long as that's happened, there's really no barrier to moving forward. It's not a technical issue at that point. It's just an organizational decision to behave in that way.
I think the other aspect that gets in the way sometimes is the shiny thing that both teams have a problem with. Right.
That's true.
Something cool will come out in security and everybody wants to implement it. And the same thing happens in infrastructure where, this new feature solves, world hunger. I need this. And both of them have problems, right? The shiny security thing might cause serious usability problems. The shiny infrastructure thing might be a complete security hole that nobody ever should have implemented, right? And balancing those two is always a problem.
Mm.
We had, internally we had those struggles when we decided on our RMM. Right.
Yeah, I was going to just bring that up. Internal projects alone have caused confusion and delay.
Yeah, I mean, these are things that every organization is going to have to deal with, and we deal with them internally too. We always have that struggle. I think we've gotten very good with it over the past year and a half or so, because we've integrated the two pieces of the company so well, and we talk regularly. Again, communication really saved the day with all of that stuff.
So I couldn't agree more. I mean, it really is no more complicated. I think, communicating, but coming from a position of trust, sort of mutual trust. If you can do that and recognize that, there might not be that perfect solution in either direction, you just find your best balance. It doesn't have to be that hard, but it does really come down to communication. I think nothing's worse than when two groups work in isolation, and then just assume the other one has, some malintent somewhere, which we see all the time, right? So, well, I feel like we just solved something that I've struggled with for a lot of years on exactly how to address all of this. So I'm pretty satisfied with this.
Yeah, a lot of it is just getting some chemistry with people.
Right.
Putting them in the same rooms more often, getting them to talk more often, being part of project process from the beginning. helps a lot. And I think that's avoided a lot of times. We have separate departments, right? We're not integrated into infrastructure most of the time. We're not integrated into security if you're on the other side. Seeing more of that would probably help. And again, making sure that people are part of the process from the get-go.
It's helpful.
Yeah.
Lou, anything you want to add in closing?
No, that would make my job a lot easier. That's for sure.
Well, I think if we can make Lou's job easier, then we really.
I mean, that's the reason we all live. We want to make
that's
Lou's
the
job
goal.
easier.
100%. I mean, that's why we're here. We figured this out. Let's make Lou's job easier. So, all right. I mean, I think on that note, right, the takeaway is if you're in this IT space, maybe doing some security, really trying to open up those lines of communication, and I think really, really no tongue in cheek intended. Don't be on that side of no. Like, definitely find that middle ground and be willing to compromise. I guess that's just the nature of life. But this existential podcast today.
I think you'll find that there's actually a lot of similarities. Some of the best security people are good infrastructure engineers.
That's fair.
So I think both teams have a lot to offer each other, and they should talk more.
Right. Well, as always, if you want to talk about your challenges getting a security project done, or maybe vice versa, right? Where you feel that security is being an impediment, let us know. I think actually one of the things that we do bring to the table that is really effective is sort of our ability to find that common ground or that middle ground and be reasonable arbiters. So, feel free to reach out to us, LinkedIn, Twitter. We're happy to bring in Lou to a follow-up conversation, right? A skilled people person. And we'll continue our conversation from there. But as always, we hope people got value out of this. We appreciate you listening. Steve, Matt, Lou, thanks for joining today.
Thank you.
Stay vigilant. Stay resilient. This has been CyberSound.